Everybody, welcome to uh, the latest stream that I have here. And I would also like to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the last stream, either when I was live or otherwise. And today, I just want to run down some news that I have selected that I think are going to be quite interesting. Primarily, what I would like to talk about is something that has to do with Aduhelm. I'm also gonna try and simultaneously stream on Instagram Live. Never done that too. So, hi everybody. Uh, let's see if anybody will join either here or there. But basically, again, today I'd like to talk about some of the really interesting stories that I found that have to do with Biogen, as well as a few other ones that I've found. Hey, Mishka. Haven't seen you in a while. Anyway, so the first story that I wanted to talk about, actually, I have it here. It comes from Healthcare Dive, and its title is FDA revises labeling on Biogen's Alzheimer's drug to emphasize early treatment. So, as you may know, basically, Biogen's Aduhelm was recently approved a couple of weeks ago to treat Alzheimer's disease. This is the first disease-modifying medication that has been approved. So there was a lot of controversy, as you may or may not recall, about this particular approval. And there were a series of resignations from FDA advisory panel, which recommended not to approve Aduhelm actually prior to its approval, sort of in protest to that. But the way that FDA actually approved this drug, which is fascinating, it actually approved it for a much broader indication than even Biogen sort of originally pitched them for. And what resulted recently, which is the story that you see here, was basically FDA sort of rolling back on the exact label phrasing and exact prescription for this drug to just limit it to early treatment options as compared to just blanket coverage for any Alzheimer's patients with any kind of indication, which is fascinating. I tweeted this a couple of days ago when I originally saw this news by basically saying Twitter has less editing options after you post something than FDA in this particular case, which is just staggering. I mean, I understand that when you approve a drug, you create a label which is very rigorously written and specifies the dosing and the exact patient populations and so on and so forth, right? I've read a few of them over the years, and basically now they're just in a matter of just several weeks, they've decided to roll back and scale down that label to just emphasize early treatment options, and that's not very professional. I mean, I tend to obviously say, like, hey, I believe in FDA. This is a great organization as far as approving cutting edge technology and treatment options for people, but when you do something like this, when you don't, when you start rolling back your own recommendations in a matter of weeks, it just shows like how incompetent you really are. But now, so what it sort of creates is this big, just sort of confusion among Biogen, the doctors that obviously would like to prescribe or would like to not prescribe this drug, and the FDA, because ultimately we want to help people to basically give access to the cutting edge medication to as many people as needed. But if you're just starting to sow chaos, if you will, by restricting certain populations from getting access to the drug, and that just sort of creates more confusion among the doctors who are ultimately at the front line of trying to communicate with patients and advise them on what's the best course of action for administering this medication or not. So what's interesting is the reasoning behind this label amendment, and that reasoning is actually stems from the fact that the data from the clinical trials for Aduhelm was actually very controversial, right? That's why the FDA advisory board members, at least several of them, already resigned because they sort of in protest to this approval. So it seems that FDA just didn't think it through as far as, like, is it a good idea to approve this drug with such a broad indication, and now they're scaling it down. I mean, it's really feels like it's quite unprofessional. I mean, I don't know obviously how these decisions are being made. It's obviously very complicated, but it just smells of incompetency to me. Another wrinkle to that, which is also fascinating, is obviously the list price for this drug is $55,000 per year of administration, as far as I remember. At least I remember the $55,000 mark. But importantly, Alzheimer's is a very prevalent disease, right, in America, but also around the world. So the amount of people that require this drug, that might benefit from this drug, at least in theory, is huge, and it's just going to go bigger and bigger. So ultimately, that cost of access to the drug is quite high for things like Medicare, right? Because ultimately these are taxpayer-sponsored programs that ultimately have to bear the brunt of the high costs for these types of medications. So I think FDA sort of, I guess, thought about it too, like, okay, the data is controversial, the label is too broad, because the amount of money that would need to be shelled for all of those patients to have access to this medication is just too much, and that's why they decided to scale it down. So what's coming into forefront is even latest news, which is from Stat News, which I just found today, and it's absolutely just mind-blowing to me. Like, this is something that I did not see coming at all. Basically, the acting commissioner of FDA, Janet Woodcock, just requested for federal investigation into this controversial drug approval. And this is nuts. So check this out. Basically, Janet was obviously not involved as an acting FDA commissioner. She wasn't as involved with making that approval decision. There's obviously a huge number of other people that are validating the data, that are ultimately sort of putting their names on the line, signing that approval notice and so on. But she was saying, okay, let's investigate how did this approval actually happen. Because another story that was published by Stat says actually that let me check Stat reported that Biogen had an off-the-books meeting with Billy Dunn, which is the head of FDA's neuroscience division, and in May 2019, which is a long time ago, and what happened there was basically Aduhelm was undergoing clinical trials, and the data was already kind of starting to come out that it was a little bit less efficacious as everybody had hoped, and it's very controversial. It really depends on how you start analyzing those cognitive benefits from the removal of plaques, which is how Aduhelm ultimately works. So they had this off-the-books meeting, essentially enlisting his support for this treatment. And basically, it seems like what happened then, that Dunn recommended to go through accelerated approval program, which is a lot faster than a typical FDA approval process, as well as far as I understand, a little bit less rigorous. Because again, if you think about it, Alzheimer's is it's a very debilitating disease affect essentially millions of people. So there's a huge unmet clinical need. So going via this accelerated approval route versus traditional FDA approval was very, it's smart, but the thing here is agencies, so FDA that is, claim that accelerated approval was only on the table this March, so right before the drug was approved. But in fact, this investigation by STAT actually revealed that it was actually on the books for a while. So that's completely nuts. So basically now there is going to be potentially a independent investigation into all of this process of how did this happen, where FDA actually approved this drug, who was talking with Biogen, which executives of Biogen and which people at FDA were talking to one another. So the Office of Inspector General is going to conduct this investigation, or at least, Janet Woodcock again requested it. So let's see if OIG is going to actually follow up with that and start to investigate. I think it would be fascinating to uncover how did this actually happen, because again, the safety, not the safety, but the efficacy of the drug is so controversial. It's so dubious, according to many experts who are like sort of much more knowledgeable in this. And that seems so interesting that FDA actually came to that conclusion. It's stunned not only with the approval, but also with the such broad label that it originally published for Aduhelm. So it remains to be seen how exactly this is going to shake out. Ultimately, Biogen has to make another clinical trial over the next 9 years to determine more whether or not the Aduhelm actually has enough efficacy in treatment of Alzheimer's. But again, it's a long way out. Let's see if that's going to actually affect the sales of Aduhelm, and whether it's going to, and whether the investigation is actually going to uncover something so damning that whole drug would have to be scrapped. So let me know what you think in the comments anywhere, either here on YouTube or here on Instagram, what you think about it. That's a fascinating story. I'd like to talk to somebody who might have like a different perspective on it, or who might have more neurobiology background on it. I would be really curious to have somebody else on this stream to talk about this in more detail. So the next story that I'd like to talk about is a story from Gene Online. I love Gene Online. Gene Online helped me quite a lot last year. I was actually a freelance writer for them. Oh, it's actually written by my good friend Daniel. Shout out to Daniel. Daniel, you're awesome. So this story talks about Moderna. Moderna obviously is a company that's very famous for its mRNA-based vaccine, the COVID vaccine, right? And it's been at the forefront of latest news over the last year, specifically as it was testing the COVID vaccine, its COVID vaccine in the trials. But what's now obviously their whole business strategy is to leverage the mRNA platform that they've been building over the years to essentially try and branch it out into other types of disease indications, including other types of viruses or other types of diseases, including cancer. So in this bit of news that, again, my friend Daniel wrote about, it says that Moderna is looking obviously beyond COVID to test its seasonal flu vaccine, mRNA vaccine, in clinical trials. So obviously, seasonal flu is something that affects hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. alone every year. It ultimately takes many lives as well. It's definitely something that we as humans have been battling for decades, right? And there is obviously every year there is a seasonal flu vaccine, which takes into consideration some of the new mutations that the influenza virus acquires over the year. And basically, all vaccine manufacturers just try and match those modifications with the vaccine that they're rolling out in each year. And obviously, it's from the looks of it, Moderna's approach to a flu vaccine is not dissimilar to that. I don't think they have any hopes of beating influenza virus completely, but ultimately their mRNA platform is the differentiating factor between them and other drug manufacturers. So it's nice to see that Moderna started to really push into seasonal flu again. It's a huge market as well. Obviously, it remains to be seen how COVID vaccine sales are going to go over the next six months to next year and a half. It will be interesting to see again how much money they will be able to get from sales of COVID vaccine, and how much of that ultimately is going to convert into R&D spending on other types of mRNA candidate vaccines for other disease indications. I know they have also another clinical trial for cytomegalovirus, and this one is the next one to start dosing its first patient. So what will be interesting is to know how long it will take for them to get from dosing first patient to potentially ultimately an approval. Because if you recall, they started dosing the first patient for with the COVID vaccine back in, I believe, March of last year, and ultimately they got the approval in December, as far as I remember, or like early January, right at that sort of at the end of the year. Now the question is, how long will it take them to get enough patients enrolled in this clinical trial? And again, this is, I think, is only phase 1/2. So it's a phase 1/2 randomized trial for 180 healthy participants over the age of 18. So it will be interesting to know what's the timeline going to look like for this particular clinical trial, because now there is a less pressing need to develop seasonal flu vaccine in some ways as compared to COVID vaccine, but it's still, it's a very important disease indication, and the question is whether the government, the U.S. government the U.S. government, whether or not they're going to help Moderna with removing of some of the red tape, if you will, as far as pushing that vaccine out, provided that it shows good efficacy. Because ultimately, what last year has shown us is how much different the approach from bench to the patient can be if there is a pressing clinical need, right? We went from the sequence of coronavirus all the way to the vaccine in basically just 1 year. So now, since there is so much already data out there on the seasonal flu, can we actually create a pipeline for those mRNA vaccines, at least, that can also see those accelerated timelines as compared to just general vaccine manufacturing? So it'll be very interesting to see how quickly they would be able to generate results, as well as potentially gain FDA approval. Something to note is obviously, though, both vaccines, both Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines, were approved under emergency use authorization, so not a full-blown FDA approval. So that's going to be probably different. I don't think there is any reason for FDA to approve seasonal flu vaccine under emergency use authorization, just because it's not, strictly speaking, an emergency. But let's see whether or not how quickly will this happen. So one last piece of news I wanted to talk about today. I think there's plenty of news out there I'm just trying to select some of the ones that are quite interesting to me personally, and that might be interesting to you as well. And this news again comes from Gene Online, and its title is NHS to trial Grail's blood test that can accurately detect over 50 cancers at early stages. So NHS is obviously National Health Service from UK, which is like NIH but in UK, right? And so this news is quite interesting to me. Obviously, cancer is extremely prevalent disease. It's probably the leading cause of death uh, for all kinds of different metrics. And the best way to beat it, obviously, is early detection. And there are, depending on the cancer. I mean, I don't claim to be a cancer expert by no means, but from what I know, different cancers are have different ways of identifying themselves. Some of them are easy to detect, some of them are a lot harder to detect. But this particular story has to do with a blood test that can that Grail claims can detect over 50 cancers at early stages. I mean, I would be very interested to have somebody that is more of a cancer expert with me on this one of these shows, who can tell me, because based on my understanding of cancers, if they entered bloodstream, if you see some kind of evidence of a cancer in bloodstream, whether it's well, the actual cells that are metastasizing, or hey Tanya, nice to nice to see you in the stream. I hope you're doing well. Um, so I would be interested to see, because again, what you can ultimately detect in the blood is either the metastasized cancer cells or exosomes, or maybe some, I think, DNA fragments that can also be, I guess, found. I haven't really looked into what exactly this blood test is ultimately detecting, but um, but it says it can detect accurately over 50 cancers, which is great. I think this any test that can help us with early detection of diseases uh, such as cancer is extremely important. What's more interesting to me beyond just this particular um, uh, news as far as the early detection is the whole notion of early detection. I mean, hey Daniel, I was just talking about your previous news article for Gene Online. Uh, but right now I'm talking about a different one. So the early detection is, I am of two minds on this particular topic. So on the one hand, as a scientist, I would say I'm all for early detection. We need to know as early as possible to increase the chances of survival. Um, but and I don't think there should be even a but a personal side of me is a little bit concerned with early detection solutions such as this one, because ultimately with any early detection, there and with any advanced technology that allows you to probe for something that at the earliest stages, the margin of error is a topic of extreme, has to be taken with extreme care, because ultimately the last thing you want to do with the early detection is detect a false positive, because ultimately nobody wants to hear something that is not truly there. Because imagine how much unnecessary stress this can cause to a person. And that's something I feel very strongly about. I want to believe that the tests such as this one ultimately are designed to reduce false positive rates as much as possible, and obviously false negatives. But I feel the false positives is arguably much worse in this case, because uh, it adds such an unnecessary level of stress to a person who just wants to hear the good news, right? Uh, what ultimately my personal opinion on that is I want to see what's the false positive rate for the tests, how it's calculated, because like every statistician would have their own, I guess, way of calculating the false positive rate. You only need just to ask them. And as a as a as a person that is not a scientist, I want to make sure that the data that I'm given is given to me in an accurate way where it doesn't raise unnecessary alarm bells for myself. Do you know what I mean? Because I want to make sure I'm given accurate information, but only information that I really ultimately need to act upon. Something, and that's a very broad question in and of itself, which is, patient and doctor interactions, which again I'm not that privy to since I'm not a doctor, but because I'm sort of in the middle of it in some ways, like I have biomedical background. To me, it's a very fine line that needs to be walked because again, last thing you want to hear is false positives, but ultimately the price that you pay for not doing early detection is potentially worse disease progression over the years. So I will be very curious to know what you guys think about not only just blood tests such as Grail's test that can detect cancers, but ultimately what is the benefit of early detection? What's the best way to handle false positive rates? Because I assume you cannot completely remove them, especially at that early stage, but how do you minimize it? What's the best way to do it? Some in the comment below. Tell me what you think. So those are the few interesting news stories that I came across that sort of raise a lot of interesting other discussion points that I wanted to touch on today. So with this, I wanted to just double check that my stream is still doing well. I think it is. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to doing this sometime next week, I think. Okay, I'll talk to you later, and thank you very much.